Hi, I'm Jennifer Poole,
And I'm Dave Poole.
and this is our 20 days.
So the image you're seeing is my sleeping dog.
Looks very much like Elaine's youngest son's dog.
There he goes, getting all curled in.
Yeah, very similar.
All righty. Well, hey, it was great seeing you last week.
Yeah, same here.
It ended up being a great trip. So I ended up having a meal with 5 different people. so the schedule was pretty full, and the hockey game Thursday night was good, and the concert Friday night was even better.
Yeah.
So these cheap flight trips are becoming pretty more regular. So it's hard to turn down a $45 flight,
Yeah, really. That's great.
So anyway, so one of the things you and I talked a little bit about that I wanted to touch on a little bit is this whole theme started with a blog you had written some time ago that we talked about. It's okay to touch the iPad. It's not going to end the world, that sort of thing. But we got on this topic of fear, and but in particular, in our case, in this particular context, fear of technology. So where do you think this comes from? Why do you think people feel the way they do about some technology?
I think they avoid it for so long that it just instills fear in them. I mean, for example, when I knew nothing about computers when I started out in Wright State. One of my brother's older brother's friends, had gone there and kind of showed me a little bit of what a programming was about and all that. So, it seems kind of mathy and all that. So I get to Wright State having no idea of what I'm getting myself into.
All right.
And very early at Wright State, I started doing things, and that really helped me not fear computers and fear of failure. You have to build on successes. So, for example, there was a program called Gothic, and it would print out these really wide banners on these impact printers, and it was just like big letters. You put an input card in, and it would get out this big banner that says "Happy Birthday, Dave" or something, something
Right.
like that. Well, it was written in DOS, mainframe DOS assembler, and I thought, well, that's nice, but we can't run that here at Wright State because we're running MFT or the other mainframe version. So I took it upon myself. It's like, I think I'll try to convert this. Now, I knew absolutely nothing about assembly.
Right.
I mean, I'm looking at these branch and link registers and move all this stuff. I had no idea what I was doing. It just didn't stop me. And so early on, and I got it eventually to run. Now, I also learned that you got to ask some people, and you got to dig into books and figure out the difference between how's the mainframe DOS versus mainframe MFT actually work. What parts of the program didn't need to touch because they were kind of the logic parts. Other parts had to do with how you store your registers when you first get control on your programs. A long time ago. And the other macros that were different in MFT than they were in mainframe DOS. And I worked through all that, including crashing the Wright State computer. Because I didn't quite link my registers correctly at the beginning of my program. And when I returned control to the operating system, it didn't have what it needed, and it got schizophrenic and crashed.
Right.
So I get pulled into who is now a good friend of mine, John Sloan. Got pulled into his office, and he's looking, you cached the mainframe, blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. And I just looked at him and said, if your mainframe can't protect itself against a stupid student, I don't think it's really my fault.
Yeah, do better.
I didn't even fear the people who were telling me that I did something wrong.
Right.
Because I just kind of inherently knew better. It's not really the way it works. And it went on to, and then I wrote the first online admission system at Wright State, big mainframe, other well, they're still around, but CICS and IMS. It was an IMS database and data communications protocol. It was 40,000 lines of code, and I wrote this before I graduated. And the list goes on and on, but I got myself into, I just don't fear things. And because I've taken on some weird stuff and ultimately, generally, was successful at it, but also don't fear when I make mistakes. We did that right during our Vision 2000 journey at Meade, and I had the wonderful privilege of leading up the printers. And the initial decision was to use Novell's NetWare as the print server in between the PCs and the printers. And that horribly went wrong. It just had things that were just like, well, where's my printout? Well, somebody's got to log in the NetWare and figure it out. So we eventually changed that to more of a direct path between the PC and the printer. And that worked a lot better. But time after time, I just did things so personally, I don't see that fear. But I think people are just generally scared of being wrong. It's to me, it's an irrational fear. It's like, even they would rather do something either the safe way or whatever, and they just get in this. Well, what if we're wrong? Well, what if we're wrong? We'll change it. So it's a difference. So we have those kinds of fear. Fear goes into just how we, for example, went through our after action reviews when things didn't go right and we were trying to figure out why we had an outage and why it lasted so long and whatever all those things were. And during those things, people didn't want to bring up anything that had to do with a human making a mistake. They were scared of admitting that, hey, my fault. I did this. I should have didn't test this, whatever it was. And then so the fear almost became organizational. Right?
Yeah, and you and I touched a little bit on this last week, and I guess it's always, I don't know. I've never, like you just said, I've never been afraid to be wrong in front of other people. Now, the arrogant side of me says, well, I'm not wrong very often, right? And my wife never lets me forget those feelings. But there is some level of confidence, hubris, I don't know what the right word is, that just says, you know what? There's no major penalty for being wrong. I may as well try something, even if I don't know precisely what something is or needs to be. It always, at least in my mind, it's always come down to some level of risk and reward, right? It's, I could try this, and if it doesn't work, okay, maybe somebody laughs at me. Don't really care about that. Or maybe, in your case, the mainframe shuts down. Okay, if that's an easy fix, if it's just a matter of literally turning the thing off and back on again, okay, that's not really a big penalty. Are you concerned about, I forget the fellow's name you mentioned that you got called into his office, is being dressed down by him a significant deterrent to you? I don't know. Maybe not. Again, it's not like you've started World War III by crashing this computer. So, and you and I also touched on a comment that John Langenbahn had made to me in an email here recently. He was relaying something his mother said to him on his deathbed, which I intend to take to my deathbed. I just found it very compelling. The idea of never lose your sense of wonder. And I think those two things are linked. The idea of just naturally being curious and trying this and being amazed at the things we run into in life. I think there's a lot of people that the fear of what that might be is much greater than the joy they get from discovering something new. So again, risk reward, there's just going to be a certain segment of the population, I guess, that's, not going to jump off, into the deep end of the pool without knowing exactly how deep the pool is.
And maybe we just learned this at a young age because you've performed in front of groups a lot.
Right.
And, you're drums, right? It's mainly.
Oh, yep.
And so you get up there and you're banging away and all that kind of stuff. And all these people are listening to you. And I'm sure you made mistakes. I made mistakes.
Oh, yeah. All the time.
Playing in front of churches with my guitar and all that kind of stuff. And that was just when that part of, I think that lack of fear to some degree is I've already got past it. I've already got past this idea that, oh, I'm going to be up in front of everybody, talking to them, playing for them, whatever. And until you do it and get comfortable with that, I had so many people in my group, my network group. I had one guy just absolutely refused to get up and talk in front of people. Just couldn't. Great guy, smart as could be. Got a lot of great things done, but he just couldn't do it. It just petrified him for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think, the stereotype of a technologist being the nerdy, lives in my mother's basement, sort of, stereotype, kind of feeds on itself then, because you do have, but my wife's, kind of the exact opposite of that. She's probably the least technical person that I know, but she's gotten up in front of executives, secretaries to executives who hold a lot of power in an organization, in front of classes, and learned enough about whatever the topic was that she was instructing to be a more than competent instructor. But she has never had that fear of major league failure. There's nothing wrong with, in a setting like that, saying, I don't know, but I'll find out. And maybe you will or won't find out, but you'll make the attempt. And if you aren't able to crack the case, you can always go back to those people and say, hey, I've looked at this. I'm going to have to invoke a higher power because I'm not figuring this out. So, it's not just the nerdy people, I guess, that have this fear of being in front of things. You can be a comparative novice on a particular topic and still crack this fear. You don't have to have infinite knowledge of the topic in order to get up and A, try it, or B, talk about it in front of others.
Right. So another fear I ran into toward the end of my career, I worked with the damage claims people at Catalyst Paper, and they wanted a little system that they could just digitally file everything that came their way. So each claim had a set of things. You had printouts from SAP. You had pictures that the customer submitted of the damage to the paper roll. All the documents that went into the handling those damage claims, and they were running out of space, but they wanted that, and my docket wasn't quite as full at that point. So it's like, let me see what I can do for you. So, but the key thing there was they always seemed scared to ask me, well, could it do this or could it do that? And because they had no idea of, and I tell them, I said, anything you ask me could be anywhere from a 2-second fix to not possible. I don't know. And I'll never be able to know until you ask me. So you just got to ask me. So gradually, they got to trust me that I wasn't going to laugh at them when they said something. Hey, I tell them, I said, any little thing that's just not working the way you want it to, just tell me. It's probably not a big deal, and we'll get through that. There were some things that were a lot harder to do than others. It was a fun project because I had to get creative doing that. But when they got over their fear of just telling me what their requirements are, which to me it's just like, you don't need to tell me all your requirements. First of all, I'm going to guess some of them because I know how this is going to work. I just have experience here that's like, so we just eventually worked worked it, and then they got trusting, and then they wouldn't have any trouble coming to me. So even that kind of fear, where you're fearing, you're not fearing the technology, but you're fearing the people, and how can I, as somebody who has very little fear of that kind of stuff, at least I'm cognizant of the fact that other people do,
Right.
and I look for it, and I try to make it better and make them more calm about it. So that there's a lot of different aspects to this fear. It's organizational fear, personal fear, yada yada.
Yeah, it's like I remember, I started my career at Mead in the research group in Chillicothe, and after having been there maybe a year or so, I started working more closely with some of the technical people in the mill, where the paper is actually made. And when I say technical people, I don't mean computer technology. I mean the engineers of the world that are running the paper machines, that are, setting things up to make good paper, as it were. And there was a project that I was asked to take a look at so a little short history of how paper is made. So the Chilpaco mill made coated papers. And these are things that go into, for the most part, things like anything from greeting cards to magazines and everything in between. You're fully aware of these things. So one of the ways that paper makers make a piece of paper glossy is something called a super calendar. So yeah, on the paper machine itself or on the coater itself, they apply a coating, which is basically made of clay, believe it or not, little platelets of clay, and titanium dioxide, which makes things white. The more TiO2 you put into something, it becomes whiter. So that's the first level. And you can leave the paper just like that coming off the coater and use it in certain uses. But quite often you put something in a super calendar, which is basically, think of a vertical stack of, and the most visual way to imagine this is a vertical stack of 5 or 6 rolls of paper towels. Think of those rolls of paper towels creating what they call a nip, or a connection point, where the paper kind of weaves its way through this set of paper towels, for lack of a better word. But these things are often a couple 100 inches wide, 8-10 feet, something like that. And those rolls that the paper runs through are made by what's best described as kind of a lathe, where you put them in something that's turning and you use something that kind of shapes the roll itself. Well, by definition, those rolls are uneven. And the problem that they were having in the mill was figuring out which rolls to put in which position on this stack and which way it's flipped based on the imperfections in this. But they didn't have a way to do that. So it was basically, the most senior guy kind of eyeballing something and saying, yeah, that one, and then this one, and then that one. And they'd still end up with unevenly glossed paper. So they asked me to write a program that would take these measurements. So they'd grind out these rolls, and then they would take what amounted to what do you call it? I want to say it's a micrometer, but it's much bigger than that, obviously, but something that measures the diameter at like 15 points across this roll of stuff. And based on those, if one of those rolls wore out, based on these profiles, what would be the best roll to put in its place? So again, I didn't know anything about any of this. This was all brand spanking new to me. And I remember in particular, there was one engineer who just thought it was a horrible idea for me to write this program. Says, you can't possibly, know anything about this. And it's like, you're right. So tell me again, what kind of results you're getting now? Crappy, So whatever I do is going to be at least crappy, and at best, significantly better. So I'm not going to do any worse than just randomly guessing, right? So that kind of removed whatever fear I had of I was going to do something and shut down the paper mill. And we finally got over, the first couple of times we had to replace a roll over there, and the quality of the paper improved instead of got worse. I won over a couple of people then, but again, back to your point earlier about just, okay, whatever I do isn't going to be any worse than what's being done now. So at worst case, you're out the time and money that I spend on this. And, at the time, I was a junior grade programmer, making $18,000 a year or something like that. So it's, a minute of downtime of paper machine is like worth $10,000. So, so if I did anything better than take a paper machine down for 2 minutes, I'm ahead of the game. So it's all good.
Yeah, it is interesting when you get into those situations where people are sort of actively telling you that you're not going to be doing any good. It's like, yeah, you might be right.
You might be right.
Yeah.
More likely you're wrong, but that's okay. Let's find out. We'll find out together. So anyway.
Good story, yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, good chatting with you today. You've got your travels all wrapped up. You're back from the cruise from hell, but the cruise itself wasn't bad. It was the trip to get to the cruise from hell. Yes. As you told me the other day, Paul was telling me over the last week that they ran into some significant weather on the way to, was it Indianapolis, I think?
Yeah.
And so they eventually got where they were going and all that. But so did you figure out how much gasoline your car burns idling, going nowhere?
Well, according to the internet, it averages about a half a gallon per hour.
Okay.
And we had filled the tank up before we left.
Good.
Not that we really needed to, but based on the distances, it was 100 miles each way. But just a good idea to have it totally filled up before we take off. And that at least some of the fear I had at that point, because down there was full of unknowns. And are we ever going to start moving off the highway? Are we ever going to get a plane to take us to Florida? Is our luggage going to arrive? Next time we're going to switch our itinerary around. We're going to go down a few days early, visit some folks, and then we'll go on the cruise and not try to, even we gave ourselves 2 days and it just felt like that was not enough.
Yeah, we're being in Charleston, we don't have to worry about winter weather, but during basically August, September, October, you do have to worry about hurricanes. So same thing here is if they were to order an evacuation, so those 3 months in particular, we make sure that cars are gassed up. I've got a case of water sitting in the back of the car just in case, because, here it's one of those, you get to idle and sit in traffic because what they do is they turn around the other side of the freeway. So I-26 runs inland from Charleston up towards Columbia in the center of the state. So they've done this a couple of times since we've moved here where they've ordered an evacuation of the coast, and basically both the eastbound and westbound lanes are going westbound. But even with doing that and doubling the throughput of people getting out, you get accidents, you get stalled cars, you get whatever else that ends up causing delays. So pretty much everything else you can deal with, but if you just run out of gas, you run out of gas. So that's the one thing you can do ahead of time that we've always made sure we do. So cool.
Yeah, I wonder if
all right, man. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would an electric car actually be better in that situation? So
that's a great question. I don't know enough about how the EVs actually operate. I assume there's a point in time. Well, I mean, the same problem exists, right? The only reason you're still idling your car like you were going to Indianapolis, it was, ridiculously cold and windy. So you're trying to keep yourself, insulated from the elements of the weather. So in that case, I think you'd still need to run your vehicle, right? And you'd still need to have some energy draw in order to operate your climate control systems. And the same here, when we're turned around going the other way in case of a hurricane evacuation, it's 90 degrees outside. Mm-hmm. And you want to keep an air conditioner running, I guess. So I guess the same principle would apply, but I don't know what the draw on the climate control systems would be compared to just driving down the road. I don't know what the difference is.
Yeah, no, something for me to research.
Yes, there you go. That'll be this afternoon's research question. So, all right, man. Well, good chatting with you, and we'll talk to you next week.
All righty.
Thanks for joining us today on Our 20 Days. Be sure to subscribe or like our website at our20days.com to make sure you receive all updates for new episodes. And again, thanks for joining us at Our 20 Days.